All right, everyone, first, before we get started, give yourselves a round of applause just for making it out this evening. Do it. Make some noise. Get that energy up. All right, and please keep it going for Ryan Holiday.
Hi. So instead of discussing the book directly, I thought I'd discuss something that's sort of like related to the book, because we're in a bookstore and I love books, and then we can do, like in the Q&A, we can talk about anything related to the book if people want to. But as someone who loves books, I tried to think about sort of what they mean in the environment that I talk about in the book, in this sort of crazy online world of rumors and manipulation and iterative writing and real-time journalism. If the internet is about misinformation, then books are about information, and they're about big ideas. And because you have to have a big idea to sit down and think about something for a year or 2 years and write 100,000 or 50,000 words about it. And thanks. So big ideas are increasingly rare, and they come under fire in a world where everything is 800 words and posted 2 seconds after the person thought about it. Like I quote Nick Denton in the book, who's the founder of Gawker, and he's the publisher there, and he's talking to this this prospective hire, and he's describing what the ideal blog post on Gawker is, and he says the ideal Gawker post is 100 to 200 words, and any good idea can be expressed at that length. And I think that's just preposterous. They obviously can't. This book for me was, I think, 100,000 words when I first wrote it, and then I pared it down to about 70,000. And it was only after, I think, a year and a half of research, about a year of writing and editing, and many eyes looking at it and a lot of time, was I able to now, could I write the 3 paragraphs on the back of the book. I was only able to discuss it in 100 words after I'd put in thousands of hours of thinking about the idea. And that is increasingly a luxury in a world where people are under immense amount of pressure to publish. And I was given that luxury because I have patrons, people who pay me, who've invested in me, who've given me the ability to look at the world with a slightly larger horizon. I've always sort of considered myself working for American Apparel and Robert Greene and some of the other clients that I've had as sort of like almost like a grad student, right? Where they pay you, but really what they're doing is they're saying, if you do all this stuff that we don't want to do, you can have keys to the lab and you can fool around and learn on your own. And I saw myself as being able to do that, and this book came out of that. And I wrote this book untraditionally. Usually in nonfiction what happens is you write a book proposal and you sell that to a publisher, they give you an advance, and then you go and write. And for me, I didn't even think that I could do that. I wasn't able to put it down in 5 pages. I felt like I had to sit down and write the whole thing and then reduce it from there. And so even now I'm working on my 2nd book, and the publisher wants sample chapters before they'll buy it. And to me that seems so insane, because how can you write samples of an idea that you haven't spent the time researching and thinking about? But I guess that's a contrarian viewpoint in a world where people are churning out ebooks in as serialized writing. People are writing blog posts in real time. They're correcting themselves as the mistakes come up instead of thinking about them in advance. And no one has the time to go, this interests me, I think there's something there, I'm going to hole myself up in a library or in a room in my house and just think about this and read everything that I can about the subject until I get to the bottom of it. And I think you saw that in the reaction to the book as well. And honestly, it's funny to me and sad at the same time. But so I was portrayed as a liar. I was told I was ruining PR. I was ruining journalism. One prominent publicist threatened me with violence. That one of my favorite videos is titled like Ryan Holiday, Genius or Idiot. I logged onto my computer yesterday, and there were rumors about whether I was gay or not. And because of what people said about the book, I've been banned from the New York Post. I had a writing gig with Forbes that was revoked. And the reason all that happened is not because they read the book and they objected to what I wrote, but because they glanced at the cover and glanced at the title and said, "We don't like this, that must be bad." And so no one has the luxury of thinking about things, about experimenting, about writing something and it going nowhere. And to me, that's a shame. And I think big ideas come from periods of solitude, of going for long walks, of writing something and showing it to an editor and being told that it's garbage and you've got to rewrite it. And when we look at history, some of, I think, our greatest discoveries came out of people who had that luxury. You know, you have Darwin going and studying barnacles for 10 years because it related tangentially to his theory of human evolution. You have people failing privately over and over and over again and then showing the final result to the public rather than doing this on the public stage. One of my favorite examples in the book is I talk about Wikipedia, which is sort of held up as this model of the future of thinking and writing. And someone as an art project, they looked at one Wikipedia page over I think 5 years, and it's enough to fill 12 volumes. And they're saying that this is a good thing. And to me, that's a bad thing because it means that people read this Wikipedia page as a process, and they formed their opinions about the information before it was all there, instead of stepping back and thinking. And this mindset of thinking that knowledge comes easily, or that information is always readily accessible and you don't have to search it out, you don't have to spend days or hours looking for the right book in a library or Googling some obscure phrase and tracking it down, that becomes extra crucial in a world that's facing more difficult and more complex problems. If a book like mine, which doesn't really matter, can get so mischaracterized and so marginalized just because, what about important things? What about things that actually do challenge us, that make us think? And the consequences of that in a world where the online cycle drives the offline cycle, I think are really alarming. And what these blogs are essentially doing is changing how the news works. And they're changing the news from one that is expensive to produce but cheap to read, right? You get years of expert knowledge in the New York Times for $1.50 or 50 cents or whatever, to something where the news is cheap to produce, it's a commodity, but expensive to read. And it's expensive even though it's free because it's not true. And what I wanted to show in the book is how expensive this news process has become. Because if you think about it, what they've really done is they've externalized the costs of the news onto the public. So we read a story, we make a decision on it, we invest in a stock, we form an opinion about someone, we cast our vote in an election, and it turns out that the information that we used to make that decision was untrue. And so the cost there is in our wasted time and wasted attention. And I hope this book is sort of a wake-up call for people, and it shows how the sausage is being made, and then it makes you maybe question whether you want to continue eating that sausage. And I was only able to write that book and to do this research because of the people who supported me. And so I guess I want to end this talk by thanking the people who gave me the opportunity to explore a big idea, and then thank the people who took the time to actually read the whole book and explore the big idea with me, rather than reading an 800-word blog post about it or looking at a 3-minute YouTube video, and who took a chance on a book about media criticism, which is supposed to be boring. It's not supposed to affect us. It's supposed to be for journalists only. And I guess I would just end with that sort of cautionary note, which is that if you get your news from Twitter and you get your news from Facebook and you get your news on what's trending on Google News, you miss out on big ideas because big ideas don't work well online, and so they're excluded. And we get a censorship by, not by suppression, but by omission. And those things are omitted from the online conversation because they don't spread well, or they don't spread nearly as well as cat pictures or slideshows or incendiary blog fights or what have you. It's not a fair fight, and I think we need to subsidize that fight in some way. And if we don't, we miss out on big ideas. And I think this bookstore is a testament to a whole lot of big ideas. And if we can read as many of them as we can, it's a good thing for everyone. So that's something that the book isn't exactly about, but I think it relates to the book. And so if we want to discuss the things in the book, which are, I guess, more related to journalism and marketing and PR, I can talk about any of that stuff if people want to raise like issues or questions. Hey, Robert. Yeah.
I want to ask you about American Apparel,
Mm-hmm.
and you're talking about ideas and big ideas.
Yeah.
Taking solitary walks and trying to find big ideas.
Yeah.
So where was your inspiration for American Apparel and some of your ideas and how to market that?
Well, I think American Apparel is a good example sort of the big idea that I'm talking about, right? So what is American Apparel at the end of the day? It's a sort of a revolutionary take on 21st century capitalism in that it's a made in USA manufacturer that pays living wages to its employees, and it makes clothes here that it exports all over the world. But if you asked people what they thought about American Apparel or what they remember about it, it's of course the advertisements, or it's the sexual harassment lawsuits, or it's the things that are easier to talk about than sort of a complex thing like what it means as a business, what it means for our society. But I guess for me and my contributions there, it's very much been about following the lead of a very creative genius like Dove, and finding the best way to communicate those ideas to the public. So I wouldn't take credit for anything there. I would say, if anything, my contribution has been about translating that vision into one that can spread well and can be digested on the internet, because just sort of putting out good stuff and just doing the right thing isn't enough in a media environment that is predisposed not to talk about those things. Does that answer your question?
And just as far as like, what was the inspiration for the pictures and the advertising, as far as like where did that come from?
Well, I don't take the pictures. I get the pictures and I get them in either their raw form or I already get them in ads, and it's about how do I make the public know about these things? Because American Apparel, despite what a lot of people think, has an ad budget that's a fraction of the costs of most of our competitors. And so for us, it's about doing things that make people talk, that will get attention on the internet, and turning those ads from advertisements, which you have to pay for, into content that spreads like all over the world. So if you ask people what the most memorable American Apparel ad that they've ever seen is, chances are they didn't actually see that in the place that it ran. They saw it online or in an article, or they heard it talked about somewhere. And that's very different than the strategy of most companies, which is to spend millions or even billions of dollars over the company's lifetime to put those images in front of people. And so that's what my task has always been, is to make those things spread and to make sure people see them. Yes?
Regarding big ideas and the fact that people don't focus on them as much because everything's so bite-sized, has the level of competition with, say, getting a book published, do you think gone down because of that?
Well, what it is people are selling very simplistic, crappy books. So what they do is they write something that's much better as an essay, and then they balloon it out into a 300-page book because, if it's a book, it has more weight. And so the book market, like that's what I was trying to talk about in my proposal. It's funny, like I'm trying to sell this book, and they want sample chapters, and they basically want the idea done in this bite-sized form before they'll pay for it, which to me is crazy because it's like you're paying me money to go figure this stuff out. How can I tell you about it before I've had the time to figure it out? So especially in nonfiction and in business books, what they're looking for is not great books, but people who have the ability to sell those books. So that's why you see a lot of like sort of personalities doing books and celebrities doing books, but mostly it's like if you have a network or you have a platform, you can skate by on a much thinner or crummier book idea because you're guaranteed to sell X amount of copies to your people, and that's part of it. So it's more like books are, even though the form is, or the medium is insulated a little bit from these forces, because blogs are how people promote the books, the ideas are having to become simpler to thread that needle, so to speak. Yeah?
How do you do the media manipulation or think about it in industries that aren't, underwear based, or you have women that are your potential customers? Yeah,
look, it's always easier if you have sexy pictures to go along with whatever you're selling. But it's all about, like I quote this one study in the book, and it was looking at the most successful articles in the New York Times Magazine, like what articles are most likely to make that most popular list. And it turns out the #1 predictor of virality is, the first predictor is how angry an article makes people. So obviously that's bad when you find out that the New York Times is deliberately making people angry because it gets more traffic. But what the study looked a little deeper, and what they found is that it's the valence of emotion that the story evokes. That's the best predictor of anger. So an article that makes people really, really happy is better than an article that makes people kind of angry. So for anything that you're marketing, it's all about, particularly online, it's all about the extremeness of the reaction that it evokes. And so that goes to finding the angle that you're selling to bloggers, because bloggers know this too. So what you want to do is, when you're talking with a blogger, is sort of hint and allude to the reaction that writing about this thing will evoke in their audience. And the reason that those reactions matter is that in a world where clicks are the only real indicator of success or failure, a reaction generates a lot of clicks, right? Because if an article makes you so angry that you have to comment, that's like 3 or 4 clicks. Or if an article makes you so angry that you have to put it on your Facebook and tell all your friends about it, that generates a lot of clicks and attention. And so what it's become online in this fight for attention is a race to the extremes in any direction, because that's better than any other emotion. So like actually it turns out like practical utility, so like a recipe, even if it gives you exactly what you need, that's actually an unviral reaction because you're like, oh, cool, thanks. Which is not as good as, I fucking hate that, I'm going to tell everyone about it, and then it'll get more traffic. So it's become that marketing is about the extremeness of the reaction. Yeah?
Do you still recommend using fake email addresses?
I don't recommend it. What I'm saying is that pitching yourself is, for whatever reason, people are skeptical of anything that the person is personally promoting. So sometimes I like to mimic like a fan or someone who's outraged or whatever, and I pretend to be like an anonymous tipster, and that anonymous tip or that anonymous leak will sometimes get picked up, whereas if I just called that blogger directly, they'd be like, I'm not interested. Mm-hmm. But the second it comes from a fake email address, they're very receptive to it. Obviously that's not good, and that's what I sort of wanted to expose in the book, but the reality is blogs are too busy or not interested in hearing from you or your publicist, and so sometimes other means are necessary to get the attention that you're hoping to get.
How do you come up with fake names, and is there a way you manage addresses?
So the best way to come up with a fake name, because I've trained a lot of people on this and dealt with it a lot, is if you just tell someone to come up with a fake name, the name they come up with is always preposterously unrealistic. So what you do is you take a first name from one friend and a last name from another friend, and you just combine them.
Oh, okay. And how do you manage the multiple accounts? Do you have like...
Most of the time it's disposable. So you just do it one time and then you forget about it. Because it can, I mean, the last thing you want is this name to start to generate a pattern or a footprint. And nobody really checks. I mean, I remember one time we leaked this thing for American Apparel to this one blog. And we pretended to be like a disgruntled employee. And we leaked it, and the blogger wrote back, "Don't use your real email address like next time." And I was like, "But how do you know that I'm actually an employee if I'm using like a fake email?" And because they don't care.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't feel like they're being marketed to, they're much more receptive to writing about stuff.
Thanks.
Any other questions or things I should talk about?
Did the people you criticize in the book, did they get back to you about that? I was pretty surprised how rude you were to a lot of them.
Well, I mean, I think it's about time that someone called a spade a spade. Because I think the problem with a lot of this space is that it's been allowed to cloak itself in this sort of rhetoric of like utopianism and technology in the future, and blogs are Arab Spring when in reality, social media is allowed to sort of be associated with Arab Spring when really I think it's a lot closer to like the yellow journalism of the 1900s. And so what I wanted to do in the book was make it impossible for, because other people have written books about books of media criticism about the internet. The problem is no one reads those books because they're always written by either an outsider or they're this sort of vague, condescending, this is the way the world should be. And what I wanted to do in the book was say, like, look, this is the way the world actually is, and like this is how it's going right now. And I'm gonna say the things that everyone. I don't think there's anything I say in the book that isn't openly talked about behind closed doors, like in the media industry. And so I thought, like, that's kind of a shitty way to do things. What if I just said the things that everyone says privately, like in a book? And so far, no one has been able to disprove or discount any of the characterizations that I have in the book. But yeah, some people got mad. Like Peter Shankman, who runs a site called Help a Reporter Out, he was the one he threatened to fight me, or I think he said he would punch me in the face. And then someone was like, "Why did you threaten to punch Ryan in the face?" And he was like, "I never said that, but if I see him, I'll kick his ass." And so, like, I mean, look, he's obviously very upset, and why is he upset? It's because I'm threatening the pretense under which his business is allowed to operate, which is that Help a Reporter Out helps journalists. Like, no, it helps marketers and PR people get fake things into the news. And so when you expose people for what they're doing without any of the sugary, self-serving language, they rightfully get pretty upset. But as long as they spell my name right when they're denouncing the book, it's good for me. Yeah.
How do you see the British press and the things that are going on over there comparing it to things in the United States? Our media seems more conservative. Their media seems to be more flamboyant, but then they got into those big giant hassles with Murdoch and
yeah, and it's really interesting because they have much stricter libel laws, and so like people are also afraid to say certain things. And so I don't know. There's no like one country that I think is doing it really well. But one of the things I talk about in the book that I think is really interesting is in colonial Britain, to own a printing press, you had to post this large security bond that would pay for the people that you would inevitably libel with your newspaper. And I tried not to put some like easy solution at the back of the book because I think I hate when people write a book where they say they're exposing some big problem and then they're like, and the solution is this, and I'll give it to you in 3 pages. Like I didn't know what the solution was, so I wasn't going to pretend. But one of the ones that I thought was interesting is that idea of Like, look, if you run a blog that does 10 million page views a month, maybe you have to post this security bond, and that keeps you responsible for keeps you responsible and cognizant of who you're writing about and what you're doing. And then there's some recourse. Like, the problem is, you get slandered by Gawker. You not only can't do anything about it, you're afraid to say anything because you think that they'll just make fun of you worse. So everyone's sort of like being shaken down by these bullies, and that's really the way that I see blogs. So I don't know. I think the nice thing about the scandal in the UK is it sort of disabuses of this notion that like journalism is this noble profession where everyone's after the truth. No, they're after attention and recognition and getting big scoops because that's where the money is. And it's just as much true, if not worse, online than it is in a tabloid like the ones in the UK. And honestly, it's worse because there's less. They have less to lose. Like, this is obviously very embarrassing for the Murdoch Empire, and they didn't want this to happen. If you're the Huffington Post, what do you have to lose?
What happened in the UK?
There was like a phone. These journalists were phone tapping all these like major corporations and celebrities, and then they were either like printing the stuff, or they were some people I think were being extorted with this information. It's just sort of a huge mess.
It sounds like a big part of the problem is in what the readers are looking for. So, and while I appreciate that the system is being perpetuated by these media companies that have so much control, do you see how we might be able to change?
Yeah, look, there's more than enough blame to go around. It's not just like blogs producing crap and then we're like helplessly, eating it or whatever, and we wish it was better. But I would say my response to that argument is, what alternative is there? That like they use this page view data to say, oh, this is what people click, so this is what we give them. Well, that's easy to say when you're not giving quality content. This is the only thing that there is to click. When you go to the Huffington Post, it's full of slideshows and articles about how vaccines cause autism, and then people click on it, and then they say, see, this is what people click. So I think a better model would be realizing that past behavior is not the best predictor of future behavior. But what I say in the conclusion is that a big part of, there's a lot of bad assumptions, and one of the big bad assumptions is held by readers, and that's that you can get your news in 140 characters and not lose anything, that you can get your news in real time and that it's going to be accurate, or that you can get an article about a complex subject in 80 words and that you're not going to miss anything. And if we can realize that like learning about things and being informed is like a lot of hard work, and we can stop thinking that there's some easy way to get this spoon-fed to us, that might change things, But I quote, there's that famous Henry Ford quote where he says, like, if I listened to what my customers want, I'd have made a faster horse. And that's sort of the philosophy of online sites, is they give us what we say we want, and then we end up missing out on what we need, and it sort of becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah.
What do you see the future of the internet and blogs and let's say freedom of the press in some of these other countries like China and maybe in the Arab countries where we have the Arab Spring? I mean, do you see a future? Are they going to be totally commercialized like the United States, or do you see some hope that...
There's a really good book that called The Net Delusion by Evgeny Morozov, and he talks about this sort of cult of technology where we think like having blogs in China is going to turn it into this like utopian democracy. And in fact, when he looks at it, it's the rise of social media and blogs actually makes like misinformation by a totalitarian regime a lot easier. And these tools like we're supposed to say like, oh, Twitter was responsible for the uprising in the Middle East. But actually what it did was it allowed the government to target activists and identify them by not only who they were, but where they were. And so I don't think that, considering how blogs have not exactly been a boon to intelligent discourse in the United States, I can't see the proliferation of social media in other countries magically having the opposite effect. You got a question? All right.
And what about in America? Like, where do you see there's going to be a divergence between, like, more shittiness, we'll keep doing more shittiness, and there'll be a few, like, good guys? Or?
I would say the new digital divide will not be, like, people who have access to the internet and people who don't, because, like, obviously the internet is getting cheaper and easier, and we have things like public broadband and things like that. I think the digital divide will be people who are not literate, like technologically literate, or don't have the means to pay for high quality information will be getting crap that's written specifically for them and panders to them and tells them what they want to hear. And then people who have the ability to pay for higher quality information are going to pay for it. Because if you're a hedge fund manager and you're making multi-million-dollar or even multi-billion-dollar decisions based on rumors that you see on the internet, you're only going to make that mistake a couple times, and you're going to say, like, look, I can't depend on any of these outlets. I'm going to either have to set up my own news gathering organization, or I'm going to have to, I'm willing to pay or subsidize someone who can provide trusted information. And so I see people who are able to navigate this and read, and they have the time and the ability. Like, what blogs tell us is like, oh, you shouldn't read one blog. You've got to read 10 different blogs, and then you kind of triangulate what the truth is from there. But most people don't have time to sit on their computer all day and read the same story 10 times and then average out the truth. You know, most people don't have time to read the news at all. And so when they do see it on Facebook or they do see it on Twitter or they hear their friends talking about it, they believe what they read because that's what we've been, you know, that's what our society has developed as the norm. And so I see this digital divide coming where some people have access to high quality, accurate information, and then the rest of the people don't. And that's pretty scary to me as well, because it's like we're almost dealing with two different realities. This is what we know, and this is what they know and think, and they're very different.
Which publications do you say right now are at that top level?
Well, there's Stratfor, which is like a subscription news service that's really good. Actually, I hear a lot of good things, and I have a lot of friends who read Al Jazeera, since it's sort of not subject to the Western incentives. But there's nothing I really like, honestly. There's a couple blogs that I read that are written by people who aren't doing it for money. So I like Mark Cuban's blog a lot, and he's a billionaire, so he doesn't care if you click his articles. Or there's other people who write things that aren't, their model is not ad-driven, and since they're, again, insulated from those sources, they're more honest and authentic, and they're not, like, pandering to you. But I can't honestly think of one site that I think does a really good job, and I would say, like, when you read one article on this site, it's done. And the reason that is like, they're actually disincentivized to write good authoritarian articles. Like I've been to ad meetings at the Huffington Post where they brag about how many comments their articles generate every month, right? And they say, like, look, we did 3 million comments last month, and next month it'll be 4 million. If your site's doing 4 million comments, that tells me that you wrote a lot of crappy articles that just descended into like rants about abortion or, you know, gun control or whatever people get really upset and argue about. You didn't inform people, because very rarely does anyone take the time to comment on an article and say, like, oh, that was a great article, thank you. No, they comment like, I hate this, or you missed X, Y, and Z, or what about this, or, you know, that commenting to me is an indication of a deficiency in the writing, but online it's a signal of success. And so that divergence of interest makes it really hard to find good material. Yeah?
Do you think there's some type of grand conspiracy to dumb people down so they can't delve into bigger ideas?
Probably not, but Noam Chomsky talks about this in Manufacturing Consent. He says, actors don't have to know or talk to each other to enter into a conspiracy. He talks about, it's called tacit collective action, and basically it's when multiple groups have similar incentives and similar worldviews, their actions align, and they act in concert with each other, even though they're not doing so deliberately.
Yeah.
So it's like the news media, it didn't set out to, I think, rig the Republican primary, but they certainly weren't going to let Mitt Romney run away with it 6-8 months ago, because that would lead for a very boring, half year of election coverage. So it's like, even though the Drudge Report and Fox News and CNN and MSNBC all have totally different outlooks and totally different political viewpoints, at the end of the day, they're all news businesses, and that lens is how they look at the world and how they, in fact, make the world to serve those interests.
What do you feel about InfoWars, Alex Jones and InfoWars?
He asked me for a copy of the book, so I haven't heard what he thought. I think some of those people, they get a little carried away with how overt they sense a conspiracy to be. I think it's much more likely and much more reasonable that they would sort of be I wish that there was some smoking gun that I could have said in the book that said look, these people got together in a room and they said, let's make everyone dumb. Right. But it's much more likely that keeping people I quote this Gawker writer in the book where he says the key to writing great headlines is to put just enough information, all the information you can, but leave just a little bit out so people still click, right? That's not him trying to deceive us, but that's his interest as a journalist and his interest as a blogger in terms of how he gets paid. That's how he sees and influences the world. So I think it's much more likely that their interests are just aligned in such a way that they do this stuff, but they're not out there trying to deceive anyone overtly. It's just in their interest to do so.
Final question.
Yeah.
Did you, in your research, come across anything about Edward Bernays?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
He's obviously the father of modern public relations, right. And I think that what's so interesting about that era of public relations is that there was this concept of a press agent, which is different than a publicist. Today, a publicist goes out and he pitches journalists on stories. The yellow journalism press agent was out there actually writing stories and placing them in papers and bribing journalists. He was this there was your editor, your writer, and your press agent, and they were all acting in concert to make the news in a way that benefited all three of them. And I very much see today's model as being a lot closer to that. Yeah. Instead of it being the public and corporations and brands, and then in the middle there being the journalist as a filter or as a protector or even a gatekeeper, I see again the latter two acting together to benefit themselves. And that's a breakdown that means you really can't trust what you read, because the journalist incentives are not such that they want to create quality product or that they're after the truth, they're after attention.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think in the book that you mentioned how controversy would drive up sales for American Apparel. Was this always the case, or is there kind of a breakdown between bad controversy results in lower sales, or?
Yeah, there's certainly some controversy that you wouldn't want. And I always tell clients, look, it's better to get press for positive reasons than it is for negative reasons, but sometimes those options are shut off. And sometimes you can use your reputation for controversy to sort of get press for positive things. But it's like one of my clients, Tucker Max, he started as sort of a nobody, and he wasn't going to get positive press. And so getting negative press was a way to turn a negative situation into a positive one, right? These people weren't going to like him, and they weren't going to recommend his book. So we may as well turn them into broadcasters of his work and hope that some people who see it in this negative light pick it up. And if the product is a quality product, people will like it and it'll spread from word of mouth. And that's what happened with my book. Obviously, the week it came out, there was this huge controversy, and a lot of people were chattering about it. They were saying, don't go buy this book, it's evil and whatever. But enough people bought it that it debuted on the bestseller list, and then from there, it's spread by word of mouth. So the necessary assumption there is that you have a quality product. If you just court controversy and then everyone hates what you actually do, it's not going to work, because you're not going to get that that word of mouth lift from the initial burst of attention. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, if you're doing something that's good, it's much better. Like I've gotten a bunch of people have emailed me or called me after the book, and they're like, "I have a yoga studio. How can you help me do controversy around my yoga studio?" Why would you want that? No one wants to go to a controversial yoga studio. But sometimes, like for Tucker's books, it's like feminists aren't going to like his book, so we could deploy them as people who are talking about the book, and then people who don't like what feminists say are going to buy the book, and that's what happened, and it obviously worked for him.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Well, cool. So I don't know if anyone has any more questions. I guess we can do it in the back or whatever. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, so if you still need to purchase a copy of the book, you can purchase them in the front.
Fantastic.